Good morning. Good morning on this snowy / icy / rainy morning. Welcome everyone. This is the Thursday, February 6th, Concord Middle School Building Committee meeting. We have a fairly short agenda today. This was a meeting that popped up in mostly for the sake of schedule and enrollment. So those are our two largest topics that we'll discuss today because we have our regularly scheduled meeting next Thursday, which that's our typical monthly. So with that, I'll call the meeting to order. And our first order of business, actually I want to say something. Our fellow leader, Tim Holt, is actually having surgery today. So we want to wish him well and a speedy recovery. So hence the reason I'm running the meeting. I also wondered if it might be appropriate to have a moment of silence for Chase Bjork, our fellow Concord student who we lost last week. So if everyone's okay with that, if we could just think about that family for a moment. Okay, so with that, we will get started. We were just having a moment of silence for Chase and his family, yes. So just thinking about them right now. So first order of business, approval of minutes, the January 8th Sustainability Subcommittee meeting minutes. And I don't know if anyone has any comments or changes to that, edits. I'm seeing shaking heads. Yes.
Just clarification on this. I heard reference to the fact that the entire committee would be looking at subcommittee minutes approval. I've always found it difficult to consider a meeting I wasn't present at, and typically would abstain, not to not support the affirmation of the vote, but.
How does it work? I
can't do it.
Yeah, how does it work in other committees in town, just for reference, with subcommittee and meeting notes and?
That's the way it's done.
That the full committee?
No, it's done only by the people who attended.
By the people who attended?
That's almost the law in case of ZBA and so forth.
If you weren't there.
Yeah.
What if just those people vote on
Okay. Is that how we wanna proceed? This is sort of that I'm looking at Stephen.
So one of the things you could do is that, the subcommittee should vote to approve their minutes.
Mm-hmm.
It is a kind of a formality, but if the full committee wanted to vote to accept the subcommittee's minutes as approved, that'd be how I would recommend wording the motion.
Okay.
I don't really think you need to do that, but because like I said, it's the subcommittee's minutes, if they approve them, they get posted as subcommittee minutes.
Okay.
But if the full committee doesn't want to do that, that's how I would recommend it.
Okay. Is that, okay. Do we have enough I'm looking around. Is 3 a quorum on that?
Yeah.
Yes.
We have about 5.
All 5 of you guys are here. Great. Okay, so with that, would anyone like to make a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Do I have a second? Okay. With that, the full committee would vote to accept the recommendation of approval of the Sustainability Subcommittee meeting minutes from January 8th, 2020. Was that a move? So moved?
So moved.
Yes. Okay. And second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. So let's do the same thing for the January 22nd Communications Subcommittee minutes.
I move that the committee accept the approved minutes from the communications.
Seconded?
Thank you. Okay. And all in favor from that committee?
Aye.
Okay. And would anyone like to make a motion on the full committee to accept the recommendation?
So moved.
Thank you, Susan. And second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, so both meeting minutes are approved. Sorry for the long motions. All right, moving right along. Update on the project schedule. I'm gonna look to Mike Carroll from Hill to walk us through this. Does everyone have his handout? Is it also going to be on the screen?
Yes.
Excellent.
So just to preface this, when we get to the last page of the handout, we're gonna be talking about pros and cons. And the pros and cons, we're going to have a discussion overall on the 3 potential dates that we had discussed. Just so everybody's got the basis here. The 3 dates that have been discussed in the past were having a town vote, call it September 1st, let's say the first week in September, which would require a town meeting, maybe 2 weeks before that. The second option was to have the town vote coincide with the presidential election on November 3rd, which again would have a town meeting sometime at least 2 weeks prior to that. I think we actually were talking about maybe doing it a little bit sooner than that in that option because we had more time. And then through discussions and through seeing where the construction schedule would naturally fall, we brought a third option on the table, which is in between those two, which is doing a vote at the end of September, which means a town meeting would be the middle of September. So the schedule that I've got right now is reflecting that middle one, just because that's the one that kind of falls in line with the construction. It's not to bias anybody towards that one or anything like that, but it's just we had to have something to start with. So I'm gonna go through that real quickly.
Can I just preface that by saying it's special town meeting, so that, right? That's just.
I think
so
in any
that's
one of
clear.
these, it would be a
Any one-
special
That's,
town.
I just wanted to be clear on that,
That's it.
any one of these is a special town meeting, okay.
So,
Quick
go ahead.
clarification question, sorry, I'm not jumping
No,
in,
absolutely.
but I was always under the impression that we needed 35 days between the special town meeting and a vote. Is it only 2 weeks now?
So technically, I don't think there's any requirement specific to a number of days in between the meetings. But what it is that you have to have certain documentation 35 days before the meeting. So what you would have to do is 35 days before the town meeting, you'd be putting in place not only the information for the town meeting, but also the information for the vote, is my understanding.
So it's 14 days before the town meeting, folks have to have the warrant in their hands. And then if there is a debt exclusion passed, it must be on the ballot within 45 days of the town meeting. So the timeline isn't a minimum, it's a maximum.
It's a maximum.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you must have the vote 45 days, within 45 days.
And we actually have some line items here about the warrants and stuff like that, and that's one of the things we want to make sure we get correct. So that's going to be part of this discussion, is understanding, this was our best effort at it. We want to get everybody's feedback on it. The last thing, just as a preface to this, is anything that we discussed today may affect this, may adjust this. And right now, I'm scheduled to come back to Concord tomorrow morning to meet with the League of Women Voters. And we're going to be going over basically the updated version of this package. So whatever we decide as a group today to make adjustments, I'll be making those, or Andy and I will be making those this afternoon. And we'll be having an updated presentation for tomorrow. So regardless of what we decide here today, everything tomorrow is going to be noted as draft, because we're not looking to necessarily make a 100% commitment today. If we can, that's great. But I just want to have that discussion here. We want to be able to bring it to the League of Women Voters so that they have an opportunity to give us their input on it as well. And so with that, I just want to kind of give an idea of where we're coming from.
Thank you for that, and thank you for your prompt response this afternoon ahead of that, and I think that's part of the reason we decided to have this meeting, to have a little bit more information to share tomorrow, knowing that this becomes critical path for our project. Deciding when this is really critical right now, so.
It is.
It is, so I think we all felt that this meeting was important, so everyone, thank you for making yourselves available and for the discussion today, and thanks to Hill for turning it around quickly for tomorrow's meeting.
It's 90 days, I'm sorry.
The max.
The deadline for the vote is 90 days.
Within 90 days of
The 45 days is a petition for a special town meeting, you have to have it within 45 days. I was transposing those two things.
All right, so the other thing, just maybe again to set the table here, is the reason why we're looking to finalize a schedule is a couple-fold. One is so that we can set clear dates for the town, for warrants being issued, requesting for town meeting, requesting for votes, and all that. But it also helps the design team on their end, understanding when do they need to have the schematic package to us, which is that first submission, which right now is end of March. When do they need to have that second, feasibility
Yeah.
first, second package schematic over the summer? That's where we start really getting more concrete numbers on the cost of the project, and we can understand that schematic design cost estimate is what's going to feed into any debt exclusion vote. So it gives us a timeline there. And then the last part of it is, once we know those dates, once we know when the vote is, we can see how does that tie into the completion of the contract documents, the bidding of the project, the awarding of the project, the starting of the project, which ultimately gets us to the end date of when the kids are getting into the school. So we're talking about something a few years down the road here, but it's kind of important to understand. And one of the things that we'll understand here as we see this is, right now, with any one of these options, we're looking, I'm jumping ahead here a little bit, we're looking to finish the contract documents late summer, early fall. And then the key with that is trying to get the contractor in the ground before we start to getting into a freezing condition this year. We've been very fortunate on the construction side that we've had a mild winter. So, just kind of giving it an overview here that it's critical for the town to understand what you need to do and when you need to do it, but it's also critical for the design team and the contractors team eventually to understand when, the time frame for that as well. Sorry.
Dawn, just one item about tomorrow's league. It's a league-hosted public meeting,
That's
so
correct.
we shouldn't expect a formal league response to whatever you bring to them.
Yeah, I'm not looking for any formal, but we're looking for a lot of input from them, and any information that they have, any thoughts that they have. Not a formal, approved, just individuals asking questions.
That's correct, and I think Mike will be presenting, Lori will be presenting, Matt and Kate will be presenting, I'll be present. I don't know if others plan to be there. Heather, Susan, great, so we'll have a good contingent of folks present. Great.
Excellent.
All right, feel free to, Lori, hi Lori, welcome.
I was probably up the earliest, and now I'm late.
You had tough decisions to make today, we understand.
I don't care what your opinion was, by the way, this morning.
You'll hear it all.
I was gonna have a no win.
Parent in me is thrilled, but yeah.
They'll thank you in June.
Yeah, that's right,
Thank you
they
in
will,
June.
thank you. Okay, so Mike was just getting started prefacing the schedule conversation, so there are 3 options that he was gonna go through, so.
Perfect.
So the schedule that we have in front of you right now, like I said, this is kind of the middle ground schedule. This is what we've done. And you can probably not see this very well on the screen, that's why we've given hard copies. But one thing I would like to point out, as you're looking at this, each of these is almost like a title to a group of activities below it. So we kind of brought this to a summary level, rather than giving you a 5-page schedule that might be a little too detailed for a typical review of this level. So we're hitting the high points here with this schedule that we're showing. With that, I wanted to point out a couple of the key dates here, because these are going to be things that we'll be discussing when we get into the pros and cons and understanding these. So the first date I highlighted there is the end of the feasibility study. And right now with this schedule, that's scheduled for March 26th. So that's when we're going to have the feasibility options available to us, and we're going to have pricing on each of those options, and we're going to really be able to start understanding what are the options, and we're starting to narrow it down to what we might have as a preferred option going forward. That's when we're going to have the confirmation from the design team about the ad reno versus the reno versus the new, for example. The next milestone I put up there that I've highlighted is August 18th, and that would be the end of the schematic design. So at that point there, we would have a preferred schematic design that we'd be reviewing. We would have a cost associated with that, and that's the cost that we'd be able to bring forward to the town, and that would be the cost that we would be looking for a town meeting and a debt exclusion, and then a vote on that. Those lead us down into the next item, which is October 27th, 2020. So this is the construction. So at this point, we've gotten the vote approved, we've moved forward with the documents, we've got the documents, and we'd be looking to have the contractor on board basically right before Halloween of 2021. That allows us to get in the ground and get the construction completed by May 23rd of 2023. And then ultimately we have August 28th of 23 as the move-in date. And again, that may, or the opening date, that may adjust based off of the school schedule if it's a little earlier or a little later. But a couple of things that this does is by getting the contractor on board in October, it allows us to get into the ground before the winter. Hopefully, that's the intent there. By having the construction completed in May, It gives us a couple of things. One, it gives us that entire summer to move in, to do any coordination between the two existing buildings coming into the old building. It also might allow us an opportunity to get going with the demo of the old building prior to getting students back in. When we have that date there, May 23rd, it's called the substantial completion date. It's not the final completion date. So substantially complete means you can use the building. It doesn't mean all the dings and nicks on the wall and the paint touch up and a missing light bulb here or there is done. So by doing that in May, you have the ability to get all those other things to be finally complete before the kids get back in August. If we have unforeseen conditions that come up, something, in the ground or different things, maybe there's a union strike or something like that with the construction, you have the ability to absorb that without having to pay for premium time for acceleration, stuff like that. So that's why we're doing that. And then finally, by bidding this off-season, if you will, typically if you're looking at the finished vendors, when I mean finished vendors, I mean the people doing the painting, the tiling, the lockers, all the stuff that you see at the end, all schools finish in August and they're all busy in July and August trying to do it. So if you can work off calendar, if you will, off schedule, we feel that there's a potential cost savings there. Not a huge value, but even 1% could be $1 million on a $100 million project. So all those things are why we think this schedule works pretty well. What I'm gonna do now here is I'm gonna zoom in on this box here, and this is really the items that I think are gonna affect the town.
Okay, done. Anybody, Carter, the town clerk here,
Yes, thank
to
you.
kind of help guide us through the processes and the notification requirements, so people, I can invite her over, just wait for people have questions.
Absolutely, feel free to come to the
Thank you.
table card. Thank you for joining us on an early snowy morning.
It's winter after all.
Or the mics. Oh, they're hugging.
Yeah, yeah, if everyone can turn their mics on, I forgot as well, and remembered halfway through Mike's presentation. Great, so you wanna walk us through is this a good time as far as
Absolutely.
like understanding the parameters of what the town needs and when, yeah, why don't you just go ahead and walk us through it if you're prepared to do so.
Sure, with a special town meeting for a contingent appropriation, the vote would need to go to ballot and be approved within 90 days of the town meeting date. So that's the first sort of time frame to be aware of. That's 12 weeks and 6 days for anyone who's counting on a calendar. The select board would call the election, and I would need the language for the ballot at least 35 days prior to the election. So that's the minimum. Town meeting needs about a month from the date the town meeting is called to the actual date of town meeting because of posting requirements. When a warrant opens, it has to be open for 10 days. There could be planning board articles, there could be all kinds of other things that come up, so that's why we look at about 30 days. And really, basically, those are the parameters. Now, if there is a question on the presidential ballot, that language needs to be presented to the Secretary of the Commonwealth the first Wednesday of August.
That becomes important in one of the scenarios, I think it's the one Mike just sort of walked us through that. The good news is we don't need any cost information in that language, if I'm understanding it correctly.
Right.
It's
That's correct.
it's simple language to say, that you do or don't
Right.
support the right, so it has nothing to do necessarily with the cost. So, because I think there was some conversation that we may or may not have that cost by then in August, so there was concern. The other concern is that the select board has to approve it, is that correct? And we
They
may
call the
not have the
election.
cost at that point, so that's important to point out. Just the timing of that becomes a little bit, there are things that need to happen so early that we may not have all the information, so we're asking a lot of them to put that language on the ballot when we don't know the full cost, so just so everyone understands that.
And is that a possibility? I don't understand this, in terms of the select board calling that vote, do we need to have a number at that point? What kind of wording needs to go into that?
That's driven by the Department of Revenue. So they have very specific language, they have guidelines online that dictates exactly, and bond council reviews it, that dictates exactly what wording has to be used.
But the price tag isn't on there. I know it's kind of
It's
strange to
not,
think about
okay.
it. It's not.
And that's normal,
Okay.
that's not just in this scenario, like
Right,
in
it's
most,
approving the appropriation.
right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then what
Later
about, this is that you brought up the 35 days that I was stuck on earlier. Because I remember from last year, in order to get the funding for this, we had the vote at town meeting and then had to wait the 35 days to have the election. And I guess that's because the wording for the election has to be that far. So in this case, we are assuming that the wording that we use at town meeting will not be amended if we then schedule the vote for 2 weeks later? Is that correct?
The wording, I think that the what can amend in the wording is the design details, that
Okay.
type of word, but not the amount. That's not
Right,
changed.
okay,
That's not on there, so.
right.
I think
Okay.
it's important. It really is a standard sentence.
It's a standard sentence, okay, got it.
Before I came here, debt exclusions 3 years in a row. It was the exact same language, just the project
My
changed.
experience is it's pretty
Yeah,
much
so
the
it's really
same.
it's not something that Concord creates. It's wrote
Okay,
Yes.
for all types of votes across the state. So I think it's important that we're not trying to
Yeah.
hide something or pull one over. It's just the way it is everywhere.
perfect.
Different than the language at town meeting, which
Correct.
would be an article with very
Right.
specific
With
language, but
details.
yes. So that would be very specific, but then
Yeah.
is it a proposition 2.5 override?
It would be a debt
It's
exclusion.
A debt
A
exclusion,
debt
so,
exclusion, yeah.
because they're different.
Yeah, and this is like I
Um,
said, and this is something Concord does not have discretion in this. Like I said, I want to make sure we're clear that it's not something the town gets to decide for itself what the ballot question says.
Right.
It's standard.
Thank you.
So just so I understand, at town meeting, the warrant article will have the price. That the town will be able to vote knowing what the cost is going to be at town meeting.
That's
Yes, at town meeting. That gets approved, we go to the ballot. People who've been to town meeting or not been to town meeting go to the ballot, they see, do we wanna vote for the middle school or not, but there won't be an amount.
Right, so essentially that ratifies the appropriation that's made at town meeting.
Ratifies the appropriation.
Yeah, Pat, and can I-
You support the debt exclusion or you don't, basically is.
yeah,
in
it's an up-down
layman's
vote
term.
on the borrowing.
Mhm.
I think I want to be kind of parse here a little bit though. There will be, by the time we get to the vote, I mean, the ballot language has to go to the Secretary of State early. That really doesn't matter. In fact, the town meeting doesn't even have to have approved it because the language is standard. When we get to town meeting, there will be a price that is known. The article may still reflect the ballot language, but you have your description and we're going to have a presentation to town meeting that will include the feasibility study, schematic design, all of that stuff. So town meeting will know what they're voting on, even if the article is that boilerplate language. I'm trying. I know it's kind of a little bit confusing, but it's just that's the standard process.
Yeah, from the point of communications, being able to communicate this to the broader community as to why and how this all works. We're gonna need a bullet points, and lots of communication, because and I've seen this before, but it's from a communications point of view, boiling that down.
So absentee ballots for the presidential election will be available for overseas voters 45 days prior to the election by law. The hard copy ballots generally are available 3 weeks to a month before.
I don't know, Mike. We had some conversation. We talked this kind of out offline to kind of develop this. So I know we talked about there are certain kind of pluses and minuses.
So that's the
to
pros
each
and cons,
approach.
that's the
Yeah.
very next slide. So before I jump into that, it sounds like what I've got here, we're missing a couple of steps, or we don't have them specifically lined out. So specifically, I think what we want to add here is that the ballot language needs to be established 35 days before the election. So we'll actually add a line in there, ballot language needs to be finalized, so that we can see how that falls in here. The 1 month to post the town meeting, I think we've got that. I think we've got these durations built into this right now, but we can actually add a line item then that identifies when we need to have these, so that we can make sure that if something gets delayed or gets adjusted, that we're not overlapping these incorrectly.
The only thing I want to correct you on is it depends on the election. If it's a special election, it's 35 days. If it's the presidential election, it has to be to the Secretary of State by August 4th, I think is the date.
Right, the
So-
first Wednesday, so.
yeah.
For the president, that's for the presidential.
Yeah, so
Right.
it,
I had
That's not
that
a
noted.
town
Yeah, the
ballot,
answer is it
that's a
depends on
state
that.
ballot.
Alright, so that's important. And then, so in that scenario, August 1st or August 4th, do you need to have the dollar value on that date? Just the language?
Just the language.
Okay, alright. So not getting hung up on the actual dates here, because like I said, this is based off of the middle schedule, if you will, but just looking at, I'll say there's the kind of, the timing in between. I'm gonna work my way back from the ballot question, so this is showing a September 30th ballot question, this is the middle option. We're showing the town meeting basically 14 days, 2 weeks before that. And on the ballot question, there might be an idea if you'd want it on a Saturday rather than the middle of the week, because it might affect schools and polling. I think Julie has talked
We
with,
don't use the schools for polling.
there's only
so-
just this one here, right? Yeah, so that's not necessarily an issue here. So we've got the special election, the special town meeting on the 16th. What we've done there, from there, we've worked the warrant closing to be about a month before that. And then we have the opening of the warrant 10 days prior to the closing. So we're coming back to here, which means your warrant is initiated basically the last week of July. The other dates to understand here, I showed you before, the schematic design is gonna be complete by August 18th. That's when we'll have the dollars. So we'll have the warrant closed here on August 10th, but we'll have on August 18th, the dollar value. We'll be able to bring it to this committee between August 18th and September 16th. We bring it to the committee can vote on it, vote to have it approved and move forward. If we wanted to bring it to school committee or anybody else prior to going to the town meeting, you have some time in there, about a month's time that you can get that evaluation done prior to moving into town meeting and then into ballot. So I think the statutory requirements we have are probably working here, but we'll make sure we get those other lines in there so that we can make sure they work.
Yeah, the thing with the ballot language, the Secretary of the Commonwealth needs the ballot language by the first Wednesday, Select Board needs to vote it before that time.
Okay.
So, I'm not sure when they are meeting.
So this would have to be sooner than that on the president.
I mean,
The warrant would have to
they
be-
could do that in the warrant meeting in July.
So am I hearing correctly, if we were to do the presidential election, the warrant would have to be closed prior to that? Is that,
No,
no, okay.
I don't believe so. Just the article language, the language have to be
Yeah.
approved, but the warrant can stay open.
Warrant. All right, so,
Sorry, Mike, I have two quick questions on the
Absolutely.
schedule. So, schematic design ends on the 18th, right, of August, and we go directly into design development prior to
that's a question,
approving,
that's one of the
right?
questions we're gonna talk about with the pros and cons. So
Okay.
I think, let me jump ahead
Sure,
one second, and then I'll come right back to it.
that's fine,
So
that's fine.
we have three options on the table here: September 1st vote, September 30th vote, November 3rd vote. Those are the ones that we've talked about in the past. I'm gonna pose the question of the committee here. We've put not preferred on the first one, really because of the timing of that. That would require a town meeting over the summer. The vote is really happening potentially just as kids are getting back into school, as people are coming back in. It's actually before Labor Day. And I guess what I'm asking is, are we okay, I'll say
Can I just add to that? Is everyone aware, and maybe you are, hopefully you are, that the special town meeting, you need 2/3 approval in person? And the ballot needs a simple majority approval, and there can be absentee ballots. So just so everyone's aware, the timing of the special town meeting becomes critical because you need bodies in the room voting and you need to have approval a 2/3 approval. So I just want everyone to be aware that the special town meeting is where the most support needs to be wrapped around. I mean, they're both important, but the special town meeting is critical to have people there. And doing it in the middle of the summer, we've been hearing is not ideal due to vacations and folks not being around.
I would also say very strongly, if we do it in the middle of the summer, we are going to be accused of trying to hide it in the summer and slip it by without people being around. I think it's an extremely bad idea to do it during the summer.
So I just wanted to put it up there because it was
Right,
something that we
exactly.
discussed.
I'm just agreeing.
I think that's a yes, Mike.
Yeah. So, taking that one off the table, now let me go back to your question.
Sure.
In either of the other two options, we've got schematic design done in August 18th. And we're going to ask the committee at that point, we have two options. We stop design and we wait till we get a vote and approval, or do we feel comfortable enough to allow the design team to continue and move forward? And actually, on the second item, the pro number 7 and risk number 4 for the September 30th vote ties to that very question. And on the November 3rd vote, the number 3 ties to that question. So right now with the September 30th vote, from the end of DD till the vote, it's August 18th to September 30th, roughly 6 weeks. What we're looking at is based off the original appropriation that we have for the project, we probably have enough monies in the current appropriation that we could extend the design team without having to go back and ask for more money, and they can continue that process seamlessly. So that's the risk. I'm gonna jump to that risk 7. It says continue into DD.
I'm just laughing, sorry, I have to
Yeah.
anecdotally, that never happens, by the way. Not once in my project have I ever had enough money based on the original appropriation. So kudos to, folks who help negotiate contracts and that never happens.
It doesn't, but one thing I will say is usually most districts wouldn't give a 1 month or 6 week extension, if you will. It's usually you finish SD, you go to DD. So it's, the DD is maybe a 4 to 6 month long process, and we don't have the funds available to do that full 6 months, but we have enough to maybe continue on for 4 to 6, 8 weeks.
I'm often on hold after SD until after and that could be July to November.
Correct.
And that means, reallocating the team and then restarting up, and that takes time, so that's, from a designer standpoint, that's not ideal.
So Mike, because I think one of the things we talked about to bridge between schematic design and design development, SD and DD, we did talk about the possibility of when you have your special town meeting, or when we have our special town meeting, not only would you have the ballot question, but you could also have an article making an appropriation to supplement the design budget to get you to keep design going into design development. Because I think that, and the reason why we talked about that is because, if we ask ourselves the question, if hypothetically this fails at either town meeting, special town meeting, or at the ballot, what would we do? And the answer, I think, is we keep moving forward and take the feedback from voters and keep working on the project. Which to me speaks to the idea that any money spent on design in that phase would not be wasted. It would be for the betterment of the project, and it's still early enough where you could, work on, change design, but modify the design based on the feedback you get from voters. Now, it's not 100%, you still have a little bit of momentum loss, but you could supplement it like that, because the same people that are gonna show up to vote for the debt exclusion vote would probably be willing to support the design if they support the project. So that's kind of on the table as a possibility.
Yeah, and that's a possibility. Right now, with the option we have right now, that special town meeting would be on September 16th, and that's a month after. So we'd still have a month that we'd have to bridge in that option. But we can certainly ask for the additional funds at that point. So with the September 30th option, you have the 6 weeks. We have the potential to get maybe the full DD package approved so that we can just continue through the DD through I don't know if I have that blown up here or this. DD is scheduled right now to go through January 26th. So based off of my other projects, the overall value you're gonna need for DD is somewhere between $1 million and $2 million. Yeah, it's probably closer to $1.5 million. Again, I'd have to,
You're just taking the balance and dividing it by the
yeah.
number of months. Yeah.
Right. So I'd have to get that confirmation from the design team exactly on what that cost would be, but that $1 million and $2 million is wide enough range that I feel comfortable if that's what you'd be looking at. So just running down the pros and cons here, real quick. I'm gonna skip over the first part because it seems like everybody was okay with that. The pros on September 30th, the time for schematic design aligns with the design team schedule. So they gave us a schedule early on, and the dates that we showed basically line up with what they're looking at. The number two, the schedule aligns with the construction start before the winter. That was the discussion I had earlier about trying to get the contractor out there, get the site work going, the concrete going before it gets really cold. Number three, the spring turnover. It gives us that flexibility. It kind of gives us a little bit of a cushion on a risk side, and it gives you that potential of a little bit of cost savings and a little bit more time to move in the summertime because you're not doing construction during that summertime. Number four, the town meeting is after the school. That's really kind of reflecting on that number one. If you chose number one, you'd have town meeting before the kids get back in. Number five, you're avoiding having the vote the same day as the president. So some people, I think, would say that that's a positive. Some people would say that's a negative. We put it as a positive here on this one. And I think we have as a positive on the next one that you could have it with the presidential election. Number six, maintain design momentum. I think what Steven said is maybe we can maintain that design momentum on either of these options. So that's something that, again, maybe we can add that as a pro on the next one as well. And then number seven is that risk. What we were looking at is that you can probably continue for that next 4 to 6 weeks without needing any additional money, and you might be able to get it right to the vote, and if the vote's approved, then you can just move right into the full appropriation. The cons on this side is there is additional costs to the taxpayers because we're gonna have to do an additional vote. The comment on that though is that we would make a recommendation that it's a project associated cost and it should be coming out of that appropriation for the project.
So, sorry, in addition to town meeting, you've also got the election.
Correct, yes. I think that's what we meant by the extra town vote, so I can clarify that as well, yeah.
So there's a cost for special town meeting. That's in any scenario.
That's in either one.
Right,
So this
that's
is the
kind of a
actual
neutral, right?
cost for-
And then in this scenario, there'd be a cost for the ballot question as well, because it's separate.
For a special election.
For a special election, correct.
Thank you, yes.
The additional trip to the poll, just the fact that there's an additional trip for everybody that's needed there. Possibility that the voter turnout would be lower because they're coming just for the school, not for everything. And then the last part here is the risk if you don't continue into DD. So we talked about that it sounds like there's at least an appetite to continue into design development once ST is done. The alternative that Don mentioned is you stop and you wait till you get appropriation. What happens then is if you delay that 4 months, everything gets delayed. And with the construction, winter and everything like that, we still feel that you can get in the fall of 2023, but it's gonna be kind of a scramble to the end. You're gonna be doing construction in July and August and trying to move in at the same time. So it complicates it a little bit. It's not as clean. So, all right. On November 3rd, the pros and cons there, we have the additional cost for the town vote doesn't happen. So we don't have that because the vote is tied to the presidential election, so it's one vote. We avoid that additional trip to the poll and best possibility for a larger turnout. And I think we can maybe talk about the design momentum can continue at least through, so we can add that one in as well. The cons, we said momentum loss in design. The expectation when we did this was that we have enough funds in the current appropriation that we could extend for 4 to 6 weeks, but for 10 to 12, 14 weeks, we don't have that. So you'd get to a point where you'd have to stop the design unless we went to and got that additional appropriation. So
And
that-
just
that's-
so everyone's clear, that design development looks like it's about 5 months, it's like,
Correct.
so 4 to 6 weeks is about 25% of that phase, and 10 to 12 is like half. So just so everyone's clear on that design development piece, we're talking substantial percentages between those two, just so everyone knows that.
And that's what we're looking, that's what number 3 says, is just, it gives you that timeline. It's about 2.5 months, basically, from August 18th until the November 3rd, basically, is what we're looking at there. The adjusted construction dates could affect the overall project, so I think it could affect it, but not to a point where you're worried about getting in. But it does raise your risk profile if an unforeseen were to come up. Now, you'd have to pay premium time or acceleration to keep on schedule, that kind of thing, and then just we'd probably be having workers coming in on weekends and nights, that first month of school to do the touch-up paint and do different things like that. And that's what I have here on number 5, is just the increased risk profile potential, because you don't have that cushion of time from May till whenever you needed to finish it. So I'd be open if there's any other people or any other pros and cons that people think should be up here or not. Otherwise, I'll just open it up to questions or comments.
It's a difficult strategic decision we're making. If we were to go to if we were to use the middle option and ask the town to really put a laser focus on this project and not get distracted with another big priority, which is the November election, it gets more attention and more community education. I guess the question is, could we use that window in early September to really do good community education? It would take a very aggressive campaign on our part to see that people came informed on September 16th and September 30th. My answer to my own question is, I think we could probably do it, but I don't think we could minimize the importance of that educational campaign. Because the window is short and people are always preoccupied and distracted, just as we are.
It is, I wanna dive into that a little more, because a short window, we're talking basically from the time people come back at the end of the summer, is 2 weeks. That's not a window in which you can announce forums and information that, you have to announce in advance, you have to hope people are somewhat paying attention over the summer. So it is that the communication part of it and the education part of it concerns me a little. It would also mean, I think we'd have to be very, put a lot of forethought into it and probably start the communication about it in the spring before people leave. We wouldn't necessarily have the number to give out and all of the information, but I think we'd have to be preparing people in the spring with, this is coming, this is when we're gonna generally do things, and just be well ahead of the schedule in terms of timing on that and the communication.
I have 2 comments on that. One is that at that point, we will have a preferred option that they will be working towards when that comes in April, end of April. There's a lot of dates out there, end of March. So we have April, May, June, 3 months to share the direction in which the design team is headed. That doesn't mean we'll have costs, we don't get those until the middle of the summer, right?
Yeah.
Towards the end
We'll
of the
have preliminary budgets on the feasibility, but
That's
those
my-
are
yeah.
real high-level budgets.
That's my point, those are sort of by square footage and
Yes.
they're like looser numbers than the real schematic, which is a true.
Correct.
But anyway, so I was thinking along the same lines, what if that, those first couple weeks or end of summer and first couple weeks will be critical, but the message should start before everyone leaves for the summer and share the excitement and the direction we're headed, anything we know ahead of that. Preliminary costs, and recognize that they are preliminary, but that will at least have a window of costs that we can discuss.
And I would think you do that on either option. I think it's important to get out there before people go away for the summer.
Yeah.
Here's where we're at, here's where we're working towards, and to your point, get everybody excited before they go away, so that when they come back, they're looking forward to seeing how has it progressed over the summer.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, friends that I've been talking to, at a CCC parent event, maybe, over the weekend. But, you know, like fellow parents in town are expecting that based on everyone showing up at town meeting and supporting the project last year, they're saying, when is this gonna be back in front of us? And I think there had been a hope initially, and it always takes time in the process, to be in front of them in the spring this year. And it looks like it'll be the fall this year, which is fine. So I think people are anxious to know where we are with things and to start to hear about it. So I think that communication would be well served.
So in the spring, we'd be able to present the preferred option.
Mm-hmm.
People would be able to see design, which people are desperately interested in. That's very important.
Mhm.
We would not be able to talk about hard numbers until the beginning of school. We'd have 2 weeks to get the how much this is gonna cost.
Right.
No, I would say,
Now,
I would say as an educator in the community, and in a community that values education so highly, around August 1.
Yeah.
It's often remotely, but there's an uptick in engagement
Most definitely.
in our community.
yeah, that's true.
If we don't have stuff shooting out by
Yeah.
August 1, people
You know.
are asking for it, so I do
That's true.
You know,
think there's a
yeah,
window there.
you know,
I agree.
Yep.
our community is engaged. My email is just, you know, in a different place once that August 1 hits. You know, so being creative and, you know, using videos maybe,
Yeah.
you know, getting the word out, but, you know, there's an engagement in whatever we're doing as a district in that month of August, certainly, even if they're not presently in
That's a good
town.
point, that we can do it not less in person, more virtually.
You also are gonna lose some of those families in the end of August when camps and programs close for that last week in August before you start up school in September.
I made that point a few meetings ago, and different than
It's a
Lori's
mixed
thought
bag,
process, because the
yeah.
high schoolers are back
High
for
school kids
sports,
are
so
back, so it's.
I'm saying I'm going on vacation that last week of August. Like, I have young kids, so opportunities aren't there for camps and CCC and places that might otherwise, you know, watch my kids over the summer.
Yeah.
So you will get a mixed bag in August as
Yeah.
far as people being around or not.
So I think that argues for the, you know, as soon in August as we can start to give people the information about the hard number is I think that's when we're gonna capture people, and then the beginning of September. And starting in the spring with the education about what the building's gonna look like and the educational values of the building and that piece of it. I guess it doesn't worry me. I think we can do that.
Do the requirements change, requirements seem to be getting set from a costing point of view by the end of the spring. I think that's kind of what you're saying in a sense. If people understand the requirements and they understand the design, they don't really need the numbers.
They'll want them.
Yeah. But
It depends on what you're really interested in.
They really put their teeth into a lot of the aspects of the plan in terms of, I think, square footage. You know, how does this differ from, you know, baseline standards in the state? And what are we doing? And it's really all about getting on board with the attributes and design as opposed to the specifics of the number, which still can come, doesn't have to be connected. I think that's kind of, if we're kind of locked on that, and that's by the end of spring, and those are the parameters that go into the costing process, then you can pretty much say that we're kind of done with the big decisions. Is that?
To some degree. In
some
schematic
degree.
design, what does it look like? Is it a brick building? Is it a, you know, wood green screen? How many windows does it, you know? A lot of that gets flushed out and decided on in schematic design so that you can then set the budget. You know, what is the mechanical system? We may know that ahead of it,
So we
but
should
we
have
may
a lot
not.
of that detail done.
So I think a typical project would flush a lot of that out in schematic design. We're a little ahead as far as our sustainability goals and decisions we're trying to make early to make sure they get integrated into the project. So, I mean, as a designer, I get excited about all of those things, but I don't know if that's what the community will get excited about. I hope so. I was actually at the last community forum loving the fact that no one except Tim Holt mentioned cost, and not one person in the room, right? So they were interested for other reasons, and I hope that that continues, and the cost is, of course, is important. I was gonna look to Jared to say, is that amount of time from when we get it in August to a special town meeting in September, enough time to work out the impact on taxes, right? The median, how, like, that is what people are gonna wanna know. How much am I paying on my house? And I can show you examples of other towns and how they've done it. They put it right on their town website. You plug in, what your house is assessed at, and it spits out what your tax impact is. Those are the numbers, in my experience, that people are gonna care about.
That to some extent, that data exists.
Yeah.
One of the things we're working on, for the presentation for the annual town meeting is, metrics like what is $10 million in excluded debt due to the median and the mean. And so it's kind of an easy thing where if it's, $190 in taxes for $10 million borrowed on the median, I'm completely making those numbers up, so please don't quote me on that. Every project that comes, and that's a current amortization schedules and rates, obviously, but every project that comes up, people can look at it in $10 million increments and do some pretty easy math. So those are things we're working on trying to present. So that data kind of already exists.
Okay.
And I think I do think that you're right. The August 1st, time is it's almost like found time in the schedule. I do want to kind of get us focused again on the question of the election, because, and honestly, I don't have a recommendation because there's no right answer, I don't think. But the answer that this committee will have to, the recommendation the committee will have to present to the select board is going to be based on completely the personality and the political personality of this community. That's the one part of this that is not standard, that is really unique to the community. And since I'm new, I don't really have a recommendation because I think there's a really salient case to be made that giving people the opportunity to vote on this project as a standalone and be informed about the project is really an important choice-making thing for them. But there's also a salient case to be made that a special town meeting, if Kari gave you the numbers on turnout for special town meetings, special elections, compared to especially this presidential election, and because they're basically a month apart. But on the other hand, I think Court, you said it, there's going to be tons of yard signs, tons of TV commercials. The discussion is going to be broadly about something other than the middle school, because it's the presidential election. So there are these competing factors that I think make it so you can look at it as either way is a good choice or either way is a bad choice. So good luck to you.
So,
Laura, you had that same problem this morning, right? With the snow day?
Yeah, it's exactly like that. It's exactly like that.
let me look at a very seemingly small item, but it might have symbolic importance. A special election has a tab of what, about $10,000 these days, 15 now? So getting into a murky area here, could we quantify at all, Mike, the cost of momentum lost, option 3 here?
I mean, at a simplistic level,
That's all we can
we're
do.
looking at, I said $1 million to $2 million, so let's split the difference, $1.5 million for the design team to continue on. If it's $1.5 million for about 5 months, you're talking about $300,000 a month. Again, this is oversimplifying it, but
Yeah.
we feel we have pretty close to that in the current budget, so we could do that first month, that first 6 weeks within the current budget. But it's getting that next month to 6 weeks beyond that, which would be, needing an additional, say, $300,000 to continue the design.
We'd lose $300,000, very rough numbers, of runway on this, or we go to another appropriation to build a bridge.
And then the follow-up question of that is, we'd have to talk to this design team. If I were to shut you down for a month, say, can you still finish your construction documents on the same time period? Or do you need a month on this end, pushes a month on that end? And where that becomes critical is, right now, we're looking to get the contractor on board right before Halloween. Before Halloween, most contractors are gonna be willing to get a site contractor out there and start digging a hole, because he figures he's got the whole month of November and a good part of December, and then sometime after Christmas, the ground's gonna start getting cold, and it's gonna, the cost benefit analysis, he's gonna shut down. If I wait till Thanksgiving, now he's not getting on, and he's lost 4 or 5 weeks of productivity there. If we get an early winter or something like that, it's a cost benefit analysis they're gonna have to do, but they're less likely to start a project in December or January than they are in October. So that's what I'm worried about is, does 1 or 2 months on this end actually cost us the start of the project? Maybe it's not 1 or 2 months, maybe it's 4 or 5, maybe you're waiting till March now until you get that first thaw to get out there. And that's why I'm saying, right now we have a May end. If I lose 4 months, I can still get it in and still hold that fall of 23 opening, which we know is critical. But it crams more stuff into that summertime, and that's why the risk profile goes up. Now that risk profile may not cost anything in the end if you don't have unforeseens and stuff like that, but it's a risk that is now on your side of the ledger, and it's just more chances for things to go wrong.
And let's just be realistic, if we do that, and we're squeezing a lot into the summer, we don't have buffer. So then if something goes wrong, what is the risk if we don't make it for opening of fall in 23? All of a sudden we're looking at a mid-year move and a lot of different logistics with that.
I think we would probably try and do some sort of acceleration before we got to that point.
Okay.
But now you're paying X dollars for acceleration, that's X dollars that you're not getting into the building.
Okay,
So
it's a monetary cost.
You're spending, yeah, so that would be the first goal there would be to, I think, keep the fall of 23 opening, but there might be some additional cost to that. So again, what we're trying to do is balance getting the job done efficiently and quickly, but not so quickly that you're paying a premium for it. Right. But also not taking so long that it's dragging out and you're paying a premium for that. So we're trying to find that sweet spot.
So it seems like monetarily, despite $15,000 for a standalone election, if you're looking at the finances, it's very clear that it makes much more sense to have the town meeting and election earlier. Because there's just a much higher monetary risk if we wait. So then it kind of brings us back to Stephen's question of politically where it stands. And I feel like that also has to fit into the context of the finances, the costs that we're looking at, and the other things in here, just the timing.
It's good. I just want to make a couple comments. I think in terms of the communication and education, that the schools have a very extensive networking that information goes through. And it would be important to be able to get that same information to the other people in town who don't have children in the schools, which could mean your weekly report, but then there may be some other mechanism, because I think that that's really critical in the setup, especially before you really have a number. And then I think to comment on Charlie's point, I think that's the question that everybody asks, how much? So it's important, and it's important to get that as soon as we can.
And that's something that the communications committee is really looking at, is how we can get this information out to the non-school population. It's a challenge. We have lots of ideas, but it still does the message and the information get absorbed by the non-school population. I have a question that may be, so let's say worst case scenario, there are unforeseen complications, we've delayed the process to the national election, and we can't open in September of 23. We're still sitting in Peabody, we're still having classes in Peabody and Sanborn. What happens? And what are the costs associated with that, aside from the emotional, including all of that?
Yeah, I mean, the given is we'd have to use both buildings into the school year, which then you'd be driven by the school schedule as to when you decide to move. The other big concern I have is that our operating budget for that fiscal year is going to have to assume something, because the two building model is so much more expensive, unless we're gonna build two budgets, which I don't even know how you go forward with that. So there's gonna have to be some assumptions made, and I think if we start to have too much risk here, it's gonna be really problematic for because our operating budget, we're expecting to be able to conserve and save and economize. You'd have to make an assumption to build the operating budget, which pushes us all the way back to the November of 22 when that discussion's happening. So we do have to keep in mind, it's not just as simple as the physical location of the classrooms. There's a big piece that, because we're looking at a minimum probably of $500,000 operational cost differential. We certainly wouldn't want to ask for a budget that we end up not needing. You see what I'm saying?
Plus the fact that in a way you'd have to maintain three buildings for a little while
Right.
until you moved in.
Right, there's everything.
You all of a sudden have to instead of cutting that $500,000 by moving into the new building, you're maintaining that $500,000 and probably adding more operating to maintain the new building that we're not in
At some
yet.
point, everything's running.
Right, because everything's running already. Even though you're not.
Yeah, and we're not running the educational program that we wanna run.
Correct.
You know, MSBA, when we toured with them, their number one question, is does the facility harm the educational program? It does. So we're gonna be building a master schedule that will allow us to run the educational program. And I'm not quite sure how it looks opening up two buildings with an old master schedule. And then going mid-year into a new building with a new master schedule. That quite frankly might mean some difference in staffing as well.
That's kind of
Because
my point.
there's offerings that in a new building that you're not currently, just so does everyone understand what an education program is, and that, there may be classes that Justin wants to offer, can't, in a new building would in theory hire staff and have that available at the start, and if that doesn't open, then what are you doing with that staff, and how are you?
And it's the other way around, because we're redundant right now. So once you do open, you can have multiple people for what you really only need now is one position. So it's gonna have cost implications, because we have to build in so much buffer.
I think that, I'm sorry, is it more possible to sort of know what those cost implications were? I mean, if we wanna use as much data as we can use to make this decision, that seems to me that might be helpful. It sounds like it'd be quite material, but how much? Is it more than the 300,000? Is it more than that million
We've
and a half?
already publicly said we expect $500,000 in operational savings when we get into one school.
That's annual?
Yeah.
Okay. So assuming a
probably
mid-year move, and does your annual run summer to summer?
July 1.
July 1, yeah. So that would, like, say you did get delayed, couldn't move in September, we're talking like winter break, right? So we're looking at like 6 months, so that's 250,000 loosely, right, to operate those buildings. But you may have a certificate of substantial completion or a C of O on the other building, at which point you're now paying for the new building, and I don't know how to quantify that.
And the other thing you have to think about from the construction side, not educational at all, is that right now we're evaluating everything we've been talking about is, I'll say, is phase 1 of construction. That's building the new building.
Right.
There is a phase 2, which is demoing the old.
Right.
And right now, if we're finishing in May, and let's just say it got delayed a couple of weeks, as long as we're finishing by the time the kids get out of the building, I feel confident the day after the kids get out of the building that I can start demoing that building. If I'm still constructing the new building into July and August, there may be a decision of, hey, maybe we shouldn't start tearing down that old building. I might need it this fall. And now you're delaying that part of the construction, and now the schedule you have in front of you shows us finishing in the spring of 24. Ideally, when we get into a little more detail there, we might be able to finish in the fall of 23. And so there's a potential 6-month overlap, because what happens is the last thing you do after you tear down the old building is you're putting in parking lots, you're putting in fields, you're putting in landscape areas, and plants don't grow very well when you plant them in December.
It's big sort of summer in general. and then all the follow-up is so much easier.
Right, you're demoing when the kids aren't in the building, right? Yeah, the demo's occurring pretty close.
So the scenario I described, you likely wouldn't demo until the following summer, if that was a worst case scenario.
I mean, my last project, we got
24.
stuck and demo got delayed because of hazardous waste they found in the building and they couldn't demo it, and we ended up trying to demo a school in one of the record snowfalls of the winter, and we paid for snow removal. I mean, it exponentially added up. It was crazy.
Kari had a?
Yeah, I just wanna say that back to the election date, outside of voter fatigue from having 3 elections in the fall, you have to consider that the presidential election is going to have the highest turnout of any potential election. So when you know you have that many voters going, you have to consider that when you're looking at other dates.
Thank you.
If I could.
Mike, go ahead.
So I was just gonna follow up on that point though. I mean, I think you do have higher turnout. I think the thing that just as a poli-sci thing, if we're talking like a 90-day difference between the possibility of a special election and a presidential election, it'd be easy that we wouldn't be talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
But because there is a kind of proximity that raises that
6
question.
weeks.
Less than really, it's a month really when you come right down to it. So, but the only thing I would say is I would go back to, if the committee chose to recommend the presidential election, I would recommend that the committee also say that we also recommend that we get an appropriation special town meeting to continue with design, because I do agree with Mike. It's essential to continue with design during that extra time. And like I said, I think you can make the case, and it's not money or time wasted. It's it's money that'll save you money down the line, and that's where I think that if you go with it's president election plus appropriation is really how I look at it, and that you really have to have those two things, those two thoughts, welded together,
Right.
if that's what the committee decides to do.
The only point I was going to make as someone who's not usually involved in making these decisions, but on the flip side, I'm always thinking about my projects, special town meetings, and ballot votes. As a designer who always wants our projects to move forward because we're invested in them, I want educated voters coming to the ballot. I want them to know what it's about, good, whether they support it or not. They followed along in the process, right? And I don't want someone there for a different reason and saying no because they don't know, and it would affect them negatively. I worry about that side of it, saying, okay, yeah, great, we have all these voters, that's awesome, we need a simple majority, we need 51%, whatever it is. But I do worry that there may be people that are not informed. We're in Concord, and I have full confidence that there are a lot of informed voters here, but I do worry that there will be people that are not paying attention because they don't have students in the system. And so from my standpoint, I'm not suggesting one way or another, but I do worry that that scenario could play out.
Well, it brings up the communications front again. And I'm sitting here, I know Pat is too, we're jointly wrestling with, okay, these timeframes. If it's September 16 for a town meeting, does that give us enough time, and can we do it? The point of people being engaged as of early August is really helpful. It makes me nervous to squeeze it that tight, and yet as I think about having people educated and also what's likely to be going on leading up to this presidential election, and the fact that we would like a lot of voters there, that those are all just kind of juggling themselves in my head right now. But I feel like I'm starting to lean towards communication-wise. I want people to feel like they can focus on this and understand it, and that we can really get this information out and not have it be lost in everything else. So I feel like I'm leaning towards communication-wise, even though the time frame is tight, to do it earlier, because we can help educate the community more effectively if we're not lost in the presidential election. That's my thought, at least. I don't know.
And I think we've all heard today and convinced ourselves that fiscally, it's, the cost of that additional vote, that additional special ballot is a wash in the bigger picture of the cost that could be incurred. So, right. Do any, yes?
Yes, I think that as long as we keep them informed upfront, early, people will fall into this. I think that the voters in Concord are smart enough to take this, and if you tell them in June that this is gonna happen, it'll just be a fact, everybody's gonna go along with. It's not gonna come out bang in front of you at a late date, it's gonna be there for 3 or 4 months. And I think that's the way to go about it.
And I would just agree with that. I think if you share the attributes of what we're doing in an effective way, square footage, students, sustainability, the stuff that we know is important to people who are going to be informed voters. And you do that effectively before summer starts. And I think the point is that we'll have the data to do that.
Yep.
Then you don't need to kind of put it together with the election, because you can do it earlier, because people will know enough to make the right decision. And I don't think the summer is particularly totally a dead time. People don't take the whole summer off. So I think that can be, you can continue with communications as we learn things in the summer. And I mean, we only have a 25% chance anyway of doing something that's consistent at the same time as an election, because there's only one every 4 years. So I don't think we should be. I think that, along with Frank, I think we can pull it off, and I don't like the risk of all these expenses if we went with the later date. That's just kind of the way this comes across to me. I don't see a lot of downside.
To the September scenario.
Yeah, to the middle choice. I see a lot of upside to it. I see downside to the last choice.
Is that where you were going, Frank, or were you advocating for the presidential election?
I don't really think I want to get into the presidential thing. I think that we will, if we start in June and lay it out for the people, that they're gonna fall right into it. They're gonna think about it and talk about it every party they go to all summer.
I'll be down at White Pond selling it.
All gonna have made up their mind, and they're gonna come.
Yeah.
They are.
And I think sometimes we look at things and say, well, let's do it later. That isn't the way to go about this.
Let's lock it in. Let's get it. Let's minimize our financial risk as well. It just means you got to work harder at the communications. We know enough to communicate effectively if the design stuff is done on the schedule that I think we're supposed to be talking about here.
Also, if they know it's gonna cost them more later, they'll get into this quick.
Yeah. The financial risk is a big piece. It's a much bigger financial risk to wait, and I think that has to be taken into account here.
That has to be part of it.
Yeah, it's not the only thing, but it has to be part of it.
So is everyone in agreement then? I haven't heard any strong advocates for the third scenario of tying it to the presidential ballot.
Well, the third one is easy to argue for, and we have here, but the second one, I think, meets what I think is the profile of this committee, which is trying to speak for the community, and that is, we're constantly asking the question, how aggressive can we be without sacrificing any of our responsibility to do this carefully? What is that fine line? It's a very difficult one. To be aggressive with the timing and do a fall 2023 open without cutting any corners.
Right.
I think we could debate this for another couple of hours and we'd be in largely the same place.
Right, agreed.
If I may, just a minor point, I don't mind the term aggressive, but I think in the community, it seems a pejorative. And maybe we're time sensitive, we're talking about efficiencies, we're talking about savings. There may be a communication way, because when you hear aggressive, sometimes people say, oh, yeah, you are moving too fast. And we all get it, but it's part of that larger point of we're being very sensitive to the timing of this and what that timing means. And that's really what it's all about. And again, that will feed right into all of the savings and efficiencies we build in by avoiding middle of the winter, whatever.
So that word I won't repeat.
No, it's
has never been said without the quick follow-on of no sacrifice in the care and responsibility and the difficulty therein.
When I think about this, I think that, that we're talking about if the voters are gonna vote for this school, and we wanna have enough time to build the school right, and we wanna do it in the most practical way possible. And that's having the most time to design and build the school rather than squeezing the time.
Yeah.
Susan, you were gonna say?
Yeah, I also wanted to say, it's kind of following up on Lori's budget, running all 3 buildings in the same year. It would be a good idea as this develops to be able to point out how much the utilities are going to decrease.
Absolutely.
That's huge, based on the work that the sustainability people are doing. So it's not just the duplication of personnel, but it's
Yeah.
also.
Oh, no, the utilities are a huge part of that 500,000 that we
So that
put out.
was a huge savings.
Yeah. Good point, Susan.
So do we need to vote
I'd
on
vote
this?
this
Is
one.
Yeah?
Just
Okay.
formality.
Just to be
Okay.
safe.
So let me see if I'm hearing everyone right. I think we are all on the same page, or at least the majority, as far as looking to go with what Mike proposed as the middle ground, which has a special town meeting proposed for middle of September 16th, 2020, with a special town ballot on September 30th, 2020, which would shorten the time for potential design, a window of time where they may have to be on hold, but also reduces the risk as far as the end of the construction project and where things land, with giving us that summer buffer in 2023 in the case of anything unforeseen throughout construction. Also allows them to get into the ground in the fall of 2022, ahead of that winter. So with that,
I move that we adopt the schedule as summarized by Dawn.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Stephen? And Susan? Thank you.
Just one question. Is there any issue, the 30th was just picking the end of the month, that's a Wednesday.
As far as the ballot?
Whether it's the 29th or 30th, or we just generically
Picked
pick the last
the
day
end
of the month. I just, I don't know if there's any.
Maybe there needs to be
Preference from a
some
vote standpoint.
discussion as far as the best day of the week.
Well, it isn't the weekend or the Friday.
I mean, it's
From
up
all
to the
Monday.
select board.
Yeah.
Okay, so they make that final,
They would
Okay.
decide the date of the
Okay.
election and also town meeting.
Yeah, this is
perfect. So this
it's
is a
recommend-
recommendation
it's
to
a
the
recommendation
select
to the
board,
board.
basically, to
Yeah,
propose this schedule with modifications based on their, the dates that they would prefer and select.
Yeah, and I think it's a recommendation to the board. I know the board wants the committee's recommendation. I have my own personal feelings about it, which which is why I voted the way I did.
Yep.
Just like I said, as more of a political scientist than anything else, but I do think that the recommendation that the committee's making is the best for the project, without a doubt. The board will take this feedback and I think look at the schedule I don't know if it's the next meeting or the meeting after, but I know very soon they'll be
Okay.
thinking. Because we know that the rest of the schedule doesn't fall into place until they choose it.
This may be logistical, I'm sorry, Pat. Does someone from our committee need to go and be available for that?
Yes,
I
please.
assume.
Yes, please.
Right, so, okay,
Yes,
so
please.
I guess if you could just convey that back to us as far as when that, which meeting that will be discussed. Well,
Yeah, we wanna explain what we just
Yes.
talked about.
exactly.
So just process-wise, so now, just make sure I'm understanding this, the select board could determine that this is not the best schedule, and that we go back to the drawing board on that,
I guess.
Technically,
technically, okay, I just wanted to.
we're hopeful they consider the recommendation of this committee.
Right.
Like I said, I think without a doubt, the best schedule for the project is the one that we are all recommending as a group. But I think they may get input from others, you know, who want more, you know, emphasis on turnout or something like that. I mean, I don't know. But I do think some representatives of the committee should go and kind of articulate why it is the best schedule for the project.
In fact, I like to go in and lead that conversation, you might wanna present a bit and then.
Yeah, that's kind of why I was asking
After
you
we've
to.
shared out how we got here.
Great. All right. So much for a short meeting, sorry guys, but the super important conversations to have. So.
Can I just add one thing to, following up on this conversation? So communication is obviously key to the role of the committee, and I don't know the role Hill plays in helping us with the communication processes. As we're starting to talk about doing more social media and so I'm just wondering how we have that conversation. Maybe that's just a conversation with Hill or understanding what the role of the OPM is in assisting your committee of two with the communication as we get into more of this world of social media and platforms for communication.
Yeah, I think we can help out as much or as little as you ask for, is the short answer. But as far as, for example, if you're looking for sketches, when we get into that point with the design team, we can coordinate with SMMA to get you documentation that you can put on a website or on a Facebook page or things of that nature, or even just have it at a presentation. A good example is we are going to the public meeting tomorrow that's being sponsored by the League of Women Voters. We're going to participate in that. We've had some other public meetings that we've already participated in, so we'll be a partner for you, as the project moves forward. And most clients, for example, don't necessarily ask us to, I'll say, run a Facebook page, but they ask us to help participate with content on it. Some clients might do, some districts might do a frequently asked questions section, so that if you're a person in the district and you have a question, well, before I start asking the question, let me see if it's already been answered. And a lot of times what I've done in the past is, the town might set up an email address that you can email those questions. And if you do that, my recommendation is that one of the people that email automatically gets forwarded to is Andy and Julie. And then what we can do is we can formulate the response we would provide, but we provide that to you. And then whether that, whether the process is that the communication subcommittee then sends that message out, or does it get brought to this committee and reviewed at this committee prior to going out? Maybe it depends on what the question is, that type of thing. But when you answer that question, then it gets added to the frequently asked questions list, so you don't have to answer it again.
So specifically what's been suggested to us is that getting information out to the community via Twitter and Instagram and other platforms that are looking for bite-sized information. And we're wondering if Hill has the expertise or the ability to help us distill information into, distill content into easily digestible content.
I think that's the most important thing, whether it's a tweet or a Facebook page, is to make it as clear and as easy to understand. So I think that's absolutely something we can help out with.
So who should we coordinate with on that? Who should we touch base with?
I would say Julie and Andy.
Okay,
Yeah.
maybe the four of us can sit down and just streamline our process.
Yeah, kind of walk through that.
Great, thank you. The other thing, just in my experience with web pages and Facebook pages and whatnot, it's getting ahead of misinformation is critical, because there's so many people talking, and once something that's incorrect or inaccurate has been shared, then it's shared all around. And so I know that's something that a lot of my communities are try to get ahead of. And the FAQs can be great, putting the ones that are really the hot topics up top so that you don't have to get to the bottom. So there are ways in which you can do all of that that are helpful to people that are looking for real information. Facts, not misinformation.
Yes.
I just wanted to point out, I think tomorrow, Sam would know, is the League event being taped?
It is.
Okay, so this whole discussion tomorrow, which would be really interesting because they're very invested in all things related to the town, that we can all, and everybody else can look at the meeting on MNN.
For what it's worth, for the communications committee, and I'm just gonna, because I'll forget that I had this thought. The side by side of the two schedules, the old master schedule and the new master schedule, I think would be a compelling kind of snapshot of what a middle school, school day's gonna look like in a new facility. And then I think a side by side of, and you won't know this until you get through schematic design and you know what your equipment's gonna be, but a side by side of utility bills is a kind of a standalone, illustration of because I think, Charlie, if I heard your point, and this is kind of a snapshot to getting to know the community. Yes, people want to know the number, but what I'm getting a sense of is people are more interested in what are they going to get for that number, almost more than the overall
Well, that's
cost.
my comment too.
Yeah.
People want to know what the attributes of this thing is, and can we justify those based on the needs of children and the needs of the community.
Yeah,
That's a separate discussion from the money. It costs what it costs once you've decided what you want, what you need.
And honestly, that's great. A lot of communities would just care about the number. And I think you're right. I think the fact that Concord wants to know what are we getting for it in a detailed way is really powerful.
A lot of the social media platforms too, you need to get out with all your allies that also have social media platforms. Make sure you're following each other and forwarding and retweeting and things like that.
Yeah.
A big part of it as well.
It's a political campaign.
Yeah, it really is.
Right, you could have people reading it though, where it's not effective, so Justin's right, you gotta figure out how to get those people following and
Yeah,
all of that.
exactly. All right, we're on it.
Okay, so we're only on number 4, so let's try to move along, because in the interest of time, I want to be respectful. Next on the agenda was the enrollment conversation.
I think we're pretty settled and we were just sharing that out.
Okay.
I'll let Mike, you wanna
Yeah, so I
start
think
off?
the initial study that was done a couple of years back had 700 students. I think when we went out to the designers this fall, we had 760. So there's been a lot of discussion around that. What we're reviewing based off of the projections from the district, it doesn't appear that we're right now on target to even, we're gonna be just under that 700,
Right.
if you will. Now, those projections could be potentially adjusted a little bit if students that might have thought of going to private school then come back because you have a new school, things of that nature. There's always a plus or minus factor in there because somebody moves into town or somebody moves out of town. If 3 or 4 people that don't have kids move out and people that move in have a couple of kids, it can adjust your numbers slightly. But we feel that the 700 is a reasonable number, and I think that the target right now is going towards that. Now, the one thing to remember on that is when you take the 700, you divide it by 3 grades, and then you divide that by how many kids are in a classroom. So even though you're at 700, there's always an adjustment there that, don't worry that, if we get to 710, then all of a sudden we're overcrowded or something like that. We have plenty of space involved.
Yeah, and some of the ways we've been looking at the educational side, which is coming to you shortly, would have a little flexibility within that, so if we get over the 700, class sizes could absorb that without major issues. So we've been looking at it from a couple of different angles, which is why we're getting pretty comfortable with the 700 number.
So if we plan for a 700 number, how much buffer does that give us? If we get to 720, are we okay still? If we get to
Yeah.
750, are we okay? So how much buffer does it give us?
Go ahead.
Do we approximately know the class size at 700 with the proposed?
The proposed vision
Yeah.
that we've been talking about, it's about 20, so
20,
there's
so-
room for that.
Typically, and if I'm not mistaken, these classrooms are within the MSBA guidelines for a typical classroom size, and those are sized for 24 students.
Yeah.
So if you take simply the number of classrooms and times 4, so up to 4
Right.
additional kids, just from a state standard, that's your flexibility.
And we're also, the MSBA standard is that you design so that there's a certain amount of empty space, if you will. You don't want to design a building that 100% of all space is used at all times.
Right.
So typically, it's about a 15% adjustment there that you you have, so you have the potential for that. And then the other thing is at 700 students, in theory, it's 234 students per grade. But it might be
That's not
200 in
helpful.
this grade and 250 in that grade, and you've got to be able to adjust for that. So you have a good amount of flexibility there.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
It's good.
On this topic too, yeah.
Yeah, so this is I was at another meeting yesterday, and this came up. Enrollment came up in the context of the planning board's proposed bylaw changes that are going to be on the warrant, and so I only put it out there as as specific, or not I say specific, but as much detailed information as we can give on that flexibility, and that these bylaws won't impact enrollment will likely come up, and I think this would come up on the floor town meeting potentially, or at the public hearing in the context of those articles. I agree with you. I don't think there'll be a noticeable impact, and your formulas for the census, I think, take that into consideration, but just be ready in case that comes up.
Yeah, great.
I've only, sorry, I was only asking questions because I've heard a couple times recently, just, community feedback, people saying, make sure you plan for enough, too many towns, build a school, and then it's overcrowded within a few years.
I think
so I'm
you're
just kind of
hitting-
sharing that.
I'm feeling like we're finding a really nice sweet spot here where we aim for 700, but we know we've got room within classrooms to build,
Yeah.
to take more in.
Great.
And it hopefully will eliminate the overbuild, because I've lived that too, where you
Right.
project too high and you miss the mark, and then you got a building way too big. So we're trying not to do that. But by driving the educational program and allowing that to have a little bit of wiggle room, it's starting to feel like a really nice balance. So, and we've spent a lot of time on this. We're summarizing this in about 5 minutes. But so a lot of us in the room have really spent a lot of time on this. So I think the homework, which we need to communicate clearly.
So is
Just
there
making
a
us
write-up on
comfortable.
this, or?
Not yet, there will be.
There will be, okay,
There
great.
will be, sure.
Yeah, I think we've got the 700. I think comfortably. We're still trying to make sure that, to Laura's point, that we're sizing the building right now.
Yeah, the rest is still.
We know it's 700 now. We still have to size correctly and have the educational program met, and the number of classrooms met, and the size of the classrooms, and all of that. So that's
Getting
That's
back
part
to
of the
the
process.
getting back to the communications
Yeah.
process, this is really gonna be key to
Yeah.
articulate exactly why 700 is the number.
Yeah.
Because that's one of the big things people are gonna pick at.
Absolutely.
It
Which
almost
is great,
sounds-
because it'll drive us into the discussion of the educational program, which also we want to be sure they're understanding, so.
You should make it 703. 700 almost sounds like too round of a number. 700. Yeah. And I know you spent a lot of time trying to get it right, but the number sounds almost like
We just
Too
took-
easy.
Yeah.
Except we have a lot of development happening.
Okay, so
no.
So that was shared for
City of West Concord.
information, right? So there'll be
Good.
follow-up background on how that number was arrived on. Okay, great. Upcoming public meetings, we have right after this, actually
Yes.
5 minutes ago, Sustainability Subcommittee meeting. Today at 9 AM. The next building committee meeting is next Thursday, our previously scheduled meeting, February 13th at 7:30 AM. I have a design subcommittee on my calendar after that, I'm looking at court.
Yeah.
I don't see it on here, but I am currently holding a place for that,
So
so.
what I would offer up is, we have struggled a little bit to relate the role of the design subcommittee with the role of the design team. Had a conversation last week, tried to clarify some things. The understanding a week ago was that the subcommittee would come together next week following the large committee meeting to do a first review at the subcommittee level of citing and other concept
Great.
considerations. But I think we're gonna need to look at next week's full committee agenda to know with any certainty, is it in fact gonna be a first review of design concepts?
Okay, and maybe it's a
They had
conversation
some
with.
confidence that it
Yes.
wasn't gonna be part of the agenda for next week,
Mhm.
full committee.
Right.
But that remains to be seen.
Okay, so for now, we're planning on it.
Okay.
We'll have some follow-up discussions if that's the right time, it sounds like. So if so, we will publicly announce it and have the agenda available. Then we have the community forum, which is an evening meeting on February 27th at 7 PM. And,
At Sanborn, is that correct?
We're gonna confirm location.
Oh, okay.
We probably will not do it in the Sanborn Auditorium because we wanna
Right.
make more of a conversational
Yes, and that
feel.
was a point made at the last community meeting.
Exactly, so we will confirm location hopefully today and we'll start to announce.
Just to validate the need for a building, we're deciding none of those spaces are really
Right.
and trying to figure out what to do, so.
Fair enough. So location to be determined and will be publicly announced. We can mention it at our next meeting next
Yeah.
week as well. And then our follow-up SBC meeting for March is on the 19th at 7:30 a.m.
Just one
Yes,
comment on
Mike,
the
thank
public meeting, it's not our public meeting, but there is a meeting tomorrow at the
the
West Concord Union Church.
Yes.
That the League of Women Voters are sponsoring.
And what
Yes.
time is that?
That's at 9:15.
Dawn, if I might, I'd like to make a pitch for the community forum being either the Peabody Forum or the Sanborn Cafeteria set up for conversation. I think it's important that community members see the facilities that
Okay.
are, have hit their shelf life.
Yeah, the forum is not available, I've
Okay.
been checking, but
Okay.
the cafeteria is, we were debating that.
If we
That's-
set it up, it might work.
That was
Configure
Why
it.
don't you and I talk today and see what
Okay.
the options are?
Okay.
A lot of traffic through the Sanborn cafeteria, town traffic going down to the gym, back and forth.
Oh, in the evening,
In the Sanborn cafeteria,
okay,
I'll be happy to look into why the forum wasn't available.
oh, okay,
Yeah.
great.
Okay. Great. So noted. We'd like it in Sanborn or Peabody if possible. And thank you, Mike, for the point about tomorrow's meeting as well.
Yeah, and I think it starts at 9:30. I think we've asked
Should
us
be
out there at
to, we're there
Oh,
at
okay,
9:15, it
okay.
starts at 9:30.
Okay, because I'm at Mrs. Woodman's lending library at Alcott till 9:30, so I will be being read to by a bunch of first graders until 9:30, so I may be a little late, but I'm planning on arriving soon thereafter. So, great, so coffee at 9:15, meetings, presentation starts at 9:30.
Yep.
Thank you. Any other meetings? No. Correspondence? Nothing. Okay, not since so much.
Yeah, we did have correspondence. Forgive me, give me a second. We heard from Carlin Reed, and she sent a letter to the design subcommittee in regard to the question or recommendation that a small studio be considered as part of the middle school design. So if you haven't seen this through the chair level, I'll make sure this gets to you.
Great. Excellent.
A television studio, correct?
That is correct, yeah.
So like a
With
green
good
screen
evidence,
and-
with good evidence that, on her part, that TV studios have worked admirably in middle school settings, whereas radio stations seem to be very robust at high school settings, and that seems to be borne out here as well.
Is that a program you currently offer?
It is not, it's a
Is that something
program,
you want to offer?
of course.
Yes.
You know, and I know other communities that partner with a local cable company to really keep costs down. You know, and that's a partnership.
And Carlin referenced that and
Yep.
some funding might be available through.
Yeah, I see that at high schools a lot, so it'd be great to get at the middle school level. Excellent. Okay, any other correspondence? Subcommittees, we've kind of already discussed the communications. Okay, public comments. Yes.
I know that CPAC sent a correspondence, which was mentioned during that correspondence.
Was that,
With the position paper about design.
right, okay, thank you for that. There was a meeting, right?
Yeah, I guess that's why I
missed
didn't
it.
to mention it, because we did
That's
talk
why
about
I-
it at the
okay.
forum, but
Yeah.
we can forward to I thought we had done this, I apologize, I've been a little on another planet since last week. We'll forward to you the position paper, so the whole committee
Thank
sees
you.
what CPAC wrote.
Okay,
I'll do it right
thank
now.
you for that. We'll all have a chance to look at that. Thank you. Great, any other public comments? No, thank you for coming today. New business? All right.
Motion adjourned.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
All right.